Good morning, everybody. This is Adam Gordon,
I'm Fred Cohen.
and we are OSG. We help grow cybersecurity companies, and this is, I believe, number 10 of our podcast.
Oh my God.
I know. It's
Number 10. And how effective have they been at generating whatever they're supposed to generate? What are they supposed to generate?
Views. And, we've had a small number of views for 10 weeks in, and basically we're not doing a lot of marketing for it. Not bad.
But again, back to the theoretical model here. The idea is it takes 9 contacts,
right,
to close a sale, and 27 because a third of them they ignore, or 2/3.
Right, exactly. 2/3 of them they don't even see. Right, exactly.
Right. So what we're talking about is we should start to get sort of the first sale or two in another 17 weeks of this. Right?
Right, about that. And in fact, we've garnered some early interest, so that's always a good sign. The first job I ever did in my career, my working career, was I was a quality engineer for Plantronics. And as part of that, I learned sampling methodology. And if, your first sample of stuff, you get a couple of results at all, that's actually a good sign.
Oh, so you're saying at Plantronics, most of the time, the first couple samples, you just didn't get anything?
Well, this is more aligned with the mathematics behind sampling techniques and how to interpret the data.
Fair enough.
Yeah.
So now my experience in opening up new lines of my various businesses over time is I almost always get an early sale pretty quickly, faster than the people in sales and marketing are supposed to be doing. I just go out there and somehow get a sale or two.
Mm-hmm.
Takes about 6 to 9 months, and then they pass me. And at that point, I stop, right?
Well, at that point, you're probably doing other things than sales.
Well, no, I was always doing other things than sales, but I think it's about early adopters, and
yeah,
I am my place in the world has to do with early adoption more than with stable, steady state, slow growth, right? I mean, so I think I might have been able to get those early sales because people that I already had known and that trusted me and said, almost anything Fred does is interesting and worthwhile, let's try it. They jumped right on it.
Right.
But then it's quite a while before the systematic approach starts to work.
Right.
Those early sales, by the way, help a lot. But all of this is irrelevant to your subject today, which I don't know yet. So what is the subject of today's conversation?
My subject today is influence campaigns. I want you to talk to us about influence campaigns because clearly there's a lot of overlap between an influence campaign done by a state actor or whoever and a marketing campaign done by a company. So I wanted to explore that a little bit with you.
Influence operations. Wow. Yeah. Okay. In that case, I'm going to take over the screen.
Okay.
I'm going to take us to the scroll. You might go blank here in the interim, but let me take you over to the scroll. Can you see the scroll now?
I can.
Okay. So this is, slide 7 or part 7 of the scroll.
Mm-hmm.
So, just to remind folks, if they didn't hear the previous one, this is a scroll. I printed it out on, you can do custom wallpaper. You send them basically a PDF or a bunch of GIFs and they'll make custom wallpaper. And so I printed out maybe 4 or 5 copies of this whole scroll on wallpaper. And it turns out the resolution is good enough so that all this fits on a 8-inch high by whatever, 11 wide per thing scroll.
Perfect.
And I put the scroll, and by the way, the scroll lasts 20 years. I still have one somewhere. And you scroll it up, you roll it up into a scroll, and you put it in your briefcase. And whenever I would go out on a gig with other folks, we'd all meet, and the night before we'd open up the scroll and unscroll it to the page that we're going to look at for tomorrow, right?
Mm-hmm.
And talk about some of these issues. And it's always just one of those things that if you keep with you, it might be the most valuable thing, possession that you have in these terms. So it was a scroll for doing cybersecurity work, and this was the big picture, which you've seen.
Mm-hmm.
And there are other cybersecurity related pictures, but then get past those models and you get into the influence operations aspect of it. and human cognitive errors and sensor modes and so forth, and different, again, because of the cybersecurity background, lots of different classes of scams and specific scam methods, and then some roll-up information that I just use for other discussion points. So getting to the influence slides in particular, right? This is the resistance to change and the notion of power and influence on the bottom half of the page.
Mm-hmm.
So with that introduction, what would you like to talk about in terms of influence strategies?
Well, I would like to talk about what you've seen, large actors do, and how they would proceed with them. And I mean, let's look at something as basic as somebody wants to start an influence campaign to have Kamala Harris be Donald Trump's new running mate.
Oh, I want to stay out of politics and stick
Okay.
with the business aspects of it, because there's a whole subject area of that, and I guess I should point out that it's called cognitive security. Let me just go do a Google search for cognitive security, and so you can find it. There's informationprofessionals.org.
Mm-hmm.
And I know you're not seeing what I'm doing, but I'll put it up in a minute. Here, I'll just transition us over there for a moment and come back to the slides.
Okay.
So in the general area of understanding the security aspects, which are obviously tightly linked with this, is how do you counter influence operations,
Mm-hmm.
or use and so forth, and all the perception management and the social engineering associated with cybersecurity that has transformed over years. So Information Professionals Association, full disclosure, I am a founding lifetime member,
Mm-hmm.
is an entity specifically to talk about those issues, right? And if you look in their blog, there's all sorts of wonderful stuff, and some really fabulous people who know a lot about the subject who have written in there.
Mm-hmm.
See, now they're getting too fancy and I can't see the content. There you go. The Russian trolls, the Kremlin watch briefing, Russian firm, security democracy dispatch, all these things, war by other means, right? Lots
Mm-hmm.
of good articles, and there's more. There's now at the order of more than one a week for a couple of years.
Wow.
So it's a really good resource for that. And cognitive security is what that's called. And there's a very substantial potential future business in that arena. And we'll talk about that another time, because there are all sorts of other things involved in that at this point. But the commercial influence operations, where you're trying, basically marketing, right? And
Yes.
and one and the same almost, right? And by the way, a lot of the research into this was done for marketing, right?
I'm sure.
Yeah, I mean, so I've written a number of papers and done research on this starting in around the late 90s, and so there are quite a few really good books. One of them is I think it's How You Know What Isn't So, and other similar books. And they're referenced. If you go to the all.net website and look under research under either perception management or influence operations, something like that, then you'll see extensive articles on it with references to the research and overviews of each of those elements. And we even now have some automated analysis software that lets you try to understand which techniques to use under what circumstances, and ultimately have a piece of software called Influence and another one called Decider that are designed to help people that want to learn how to influence organizations for change, in terms of not just the sort of the strategies, but the tactics as people are moved around the board over time to achieve your influence goals.
Well, I think we should do a segment on one of those tools.
Well, I'd be happy to show it to you another time.
Sure.
But at the end of the day, there are specific tactics associated with influence, and the notion is that power is used to produce influence, and or at least we can use it the other way. Say the definition of power is something that's used to produce influence, right? and there are different kinds of influence. There's overt and covert,
Mm-hmm.
and then there's bridging. Oh, got to click on the right thing.
Yes.
I don't know how I get covert to work. Probably it's some other weird. All right. In any case, so force, right? You can influence people by force. You can put them in handcuffs and shove them behind bars, and you're influencing them to stay where they are and not go anywhere.
Yeah. That's a pretty strong influence.
Yeah. Well, and that's physical is the power, and the influence is force. You don't have a choice, right? Another example of force is sanctions, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So that's what sanctions are using, physical and economic resource power.
Right. And on the other side of that, what we're doing right now are tariffs.
Yeah, economic. That's any resource.
Yep.
Can be used as force. So that sanctions are what we talk about in those terms. And that's and then the other, so there's also, of course, exchanges, right?
Mm-hmm.
And exchanges include any contract.
Sure.
Right. And then besides contracts, buy and sell, there's also exchanges like, we provide a lot of free content. Right. And that's in essence a sort of a gift, but there's an expectation in the social world that we live in that a gift given, you now owe me something.
Right.
And it's not so much overt as something else in the way it works, but part of the reason that the U.S. government says you can't take a government employee out to lunch and buy them a coffee, right? Or pay for the coffee at a meeting, right? Is because a lot of studies have shown that even that level of gift giving, even the smallest thing, a pen, will create a response where they will favor you over somebody who did not do that.
Sure. So let's unpack that a minute. So why is that?
Oh, it's because of the cognitive mechanisms that people have.
And so talk more about that.
Well, let's go down into cognitive mechanisms here.
See, because I think we're about to completely overlap on our use of these kinds of tools, because what you're talking about is so much based on the not the mechanics so much, but the operations of communications, how you communicate and the context you put them in. And so the argument I'm going to make is that those little gifts, even though they're a pen or a piece of cake or a cup of coffee, they cause a context, and that context has meaning for people as well. And that if that context is, oh, these people are friendly and they take care of me, people are likely to view you better, even if it's just you've been feeding them coffee for a month.
Right. So there are lots of places where that comes down, but probably we're talking about emotional effects. So this is an affect that they like you.
Yep.
Right. They're happy to see you. Right.
Right.
And so positive affect improves sensory detection and recall.
Right.
Among other things. Right.
Right.
If you overdo it, then you hit their values. They think this is sort of unfair and you're going too far.
Mm-hmm.
Their notion of right and wrong. Okay.
Mm-hmm. Is suddenly they're suspicious.
That's right.
Anything that sounds too good probably is, and I need to be suspicious about it.
Right. Taking them out to a $50 dinner is a hell of a lot different from taking you out to a coffee.
Yeah.
Right. Giving you a pen when you need a pen, and it happens to be one of my logoed pens. and when you hand it to them saying, no problem, I get them by the dozens. I have another one right here. Give me one of your pens someday.
It doesn't matter. And then next week when they pull your pen out of their pocket, your logo's in front of them.
Yeah, they remember. They appreciate it.
Yep.
As long as it isn't couched incorrectly, right?
Right. This is why there's such a big business in tchotchkes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, but again, I mean, what you're looking at here there's lots and lots of ways that, people's cognitive mechanisms operate. And in particular, all these mechanisms sort of came to be based on survival, right? And as we build up societies, we have these social mechanisms. So you get into things like social proof. This is why a recommendation is worth so much, because it's social proof. I was clicking on the wrong thing there. Turns out searching in this diagram isn't that easy.
Well, somehow I'm not surprised.
Well, we do have a search mechanism, but we don't want to use it here. So that's why, again, why the online capabilities and the automated analysis is really helpful to doing that. You don't have to look around and figure out what to do. It sort of tells you. The other thing is, after you start to use the tools for a while, you get good at it, and you don't need it as much, right?
Yeah. So
you sort of use it as a check on yourself.
So I'd like to move the conversation from the strategic to the tactical. So if you were going to start an influence campaign for a company or a government agency or whatever today, what are the basic steps you would take?
So influence probably starts with the persuasion model.
Okay.
Right? And so I have a bookshelf over here. So if my voice goes down for a minute, I'm going out to the bookshelf to find the right book.
Yes, Fred works in his library. It's really cool. Well, I've moved over to ebooks almost entirely, so my entire library is always on my hip pocket.
I don't want to waste everybody's time by spending too much time looking for. I have a whole section of my bookshelf that deals with these issues. But this model comes out of a USC graduate, and if you've flown on airplanes and looked in the magazines, you've seen negotiations offerings. These short courses on negotiations and so forth. And these negotiations, this is based on research done in the, I guess, 60s and 70s on negotiations tactics. And they did lots and lots of research. The fundamental is this persuasion model. I think we've talked about it before. You're trying to produce change, right? So whatever they think now, you want them to think something else. And you got to be careful talking about how people think, because we're getting better and better at physiology and understanding how people actually think. But for now, let's talk about their behaviors.
Okay.
So if you're going to produce a change in behavior, that change in behavior, if it's not from electroshock, comes from learning and acceptance. And learning comes from hearing and understanding. And here, change comes from learning and acceptance, and learning comes from hearing and understanding. And of course, their ability to hear and understand depends on the audience and their motives and their values, and the audience information and language. So if you're talking to a computer person and you're talking in salesman talk, you're likely to have a problem communicating it. And
as a matter of fact, my first website, remember when websites had splash pages? The splash page on my website said Geek to English translation. So that whole part about language and what market you're talking to, and that you got to speak in their language, is one of the fundamental tenets of marketing.
Yeah, of course, and communications, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Effective.
I mentioned it before. You go to all.net, you click on research, you click on deception, and you have things like influence operations, a framework for deception, and so forth, right? And the framework for deception, sorry, this is the PDF version. The HTML is actually much more useful. You click on it down here. Among other things, it has references. And it has, drill downs into all of these different things. Well, somewhere, all right, it's supposed to have references down there. Here are the references. Here we go.
Wow.
Yeah. So this is stuff that I spent a lot of time and effort researching, right? So So you're getting into if you're looking at scams, you go to things like this and ripoffs. and so forth. But Bob Fellows has a book, and he's updated it since, called Easily Fooled.
Mm-hmm.
And that talks about mechanisms. And Thomas Gilovich, very famous in this area, done a lot of that research on the psychology of selling and buying and such, which is how we know what isn't so, right? Human reasoning.
Yeah.
Right? And
that's one of the things I work with my clients a lot on is being authentic, because human beings have an amazingly sensitive red flag for anything inauthentic. And so if you're saying something that you don't believe or it's not really true, people sense that almost immediately, and it's almost impossible to rebuild trust with them after that.
So there's an old saying, and it's a great saying: if you can learn to fake sincerity, you've really got it made.
That's right.
So there are all these other cognitive, but this one right here, The Negotiating Game by Chester Karras. The Karras negotiating takes are famous all around the world. And if you ask why all this BS around the placement at the table and all this stuff in these big negotiations between countries, it comes down to this Karras stuff. You know, these tactics of making the other guy back down first, and so forth.
Mm-hmm.
And there are different, tactics depending on where you are in the space. But the Karras tapes and the Karras books are really worthwhile. And then Cialdini is another very well-known one, that's on influence. And Cialdini has quite a few books again since then. So, and then for the organizational level, it's interesting to start, because organizational psychology is different than individual human psychology, although they're closely related, right? So I just wanted to make sure to give people sourcing so they could go, do the research on their own if they don't want to just, pay us to do it for them.
Sure. The other guy I really like for negotiation training is a fellow named Chris Voss, who wrote a book called Never Split the Difference. And he was the chief hostage negotiator for the FBI for 25 years. And he's started a business where now he's consulting on how to negotiate. And I've taken some of his stuff, and it really is amazing how powerful it is.
Yeah. So I'm one of those, as a researcher, I like to go to primary sources.
Yeah.
So, he's somebody who has learned a lot through a career, and that's great. But a lot of the stuff that he got is based on this earlier work. So I believe we stand on the shoulders of giants, and I always want to identify the giants.
Yep, I agree.
And credit them. But absolutely, right? I mean, a lot of derivative works. I mean, mine are derivative works, right? I mean, this write-up, there's some original content in here, but the review of the history of this and the different techniques that are in these online papers, that's the drill down of my, of these slides, right? Of the scroll. The scroll has the summary, which I can then remember the stuff I wrote based on the stuff I read and consolidated together.
Okay, so I have a question about this chart. How come the emotions are all negative? How come there's not like happiness?
Oh, you mean the chart at the top right?
Yeah.
Oh, so I get these things from different sources. So this particular chart on the upper right has to do with what we'll call misbehavior.
Okay.
Right? So what happens is you encounter behaviors, okay? And so the question is, how do you deal with those behaviors in yourself and in others? So I over my life have found myself in many situations that were potentially dangerous. And in some of them, I mean, in one case, somebody, had a knife at my side, and another case, involved a gun. And so, in those situations, your interaction either ends up with, you getting stabbed, a fight where somebody else gets stabbed, or it ends up in a peaceful resolution.
Right.
So, so far in my life, I've ended up in peaceful resolutions. So I think that's a better result for me than most of those alternatives. You also run into it in work, in interacting with other people. You run into it in consulting a lot, right?
A lot.
So, and this from our work on advisory boards, you're advising companies, and the people in the companies have emotions. I mean, it's not a mechanical thing. There's a lot of knowledge and mechanics behind, just sort of saying, well, have you tried a channel partnership here? And I know some people that are good channel partners for this specific thing. Let's try that. Let me introduce you. That's sort of an easy, simple thing. But another thing you encounter a lot is, people who, they've been working 120 plus hours and, for the last 8 weeks to try and get something done, and the world is not falling over in front of them to say yes. And they, it's been 3 weeks since I talked to this person. I haven't heard back. Should I contact them again? Should I call them again? Whatever the sequencing of communications and all this stuff. And again, those communications things, we can make judgments based on discussions, and we do that. But the personal aspect of, they get just really frustrated, and they start to, act aggressive or apathetic with regard to something that they're doing for their business, right? And it's because they're becoming hostile, and that shows in the communication on the phone,
right?
So during the session we have with them, we let them vent. Right? That's the first line up in the top right. So, you say, well, tell me about it. All right, instead of working through our 50 things to get done today, we're just going to have a conversation, and you're going to tell me about all these things. And they vent because they know you. It's a relationship built of trust over time.
Right.
And they get that out, and you talk to them about it, and you talk about it, and it turns out they're frustrated, right? No kidding. I mean, I'm frustrated too. Why? Gee, we've been doing this for 12 weeks. We don't have 8 sales yet.
Not in.
Right. But that's okay. I mean, because we understand. So we use rationality and statistics to understand that. But, on a human level, you still need a chance to just say, I'm pissed off at my audience for not, sending me $100,000 a week just to talk to them.
Yeah, just because we're nice guys.
Right. Right there. So that's what that chart is about. And you see this when people run out of money, then it's a threat issue.
Right.
And when they feel like the business is going to fail and like they're a failure, right? That's when you have to find some way to pick them back up and say, tough love is sort of the answer there, right?
Right.
And you also, people lose relatives, they lose parts of their business, they lose business partners. You have a lot of people in business end up, with their spouse in trouble, and they could end up divorced. And you talk to them, but I say, look, really, the business is not as important as your regular life here. So look, find a way to put the business into partial status so your burn rate is near zero. Ask the people working with you to, hold on a little bit longer and give you some time, and take a weekend off and spend it with your spouse. Take 10 days with your spouse. Spend the time necessary so that your life is in order, because when you're really unhappy in your life, you can't possibly proceed to be successful in a business.
Right.
You'll be miserable. Even if you are successful, you'll be, rich and miserable. I mean,
which God knows we see enough of in the world today.
Right, and that brings other things.
Yes.
So that's really, and it's ingrained into me largely, but it's on the chart because we do encounter them, and every once in a while when I'm talking to somebody about it and they point something out, I show them the chart and I say, look, here's how you deal with these things. Right? If you're working with somebody else and you encounter them in this situation, here's how to understand it, here's how you deal with it. And part of it is, being a mensch is the term, right? Being a human being. It's about, you're working with a person.
Yeah.
And those people have issues like every other person, like you have issues.
Sure.
And so, you talk about influence and persuasion, you might not get the business, but you'll end up in a good relationship. And that comes back years later.
Yes.
Right? I mean, I've had people, so at the RSA conference, I used to walk around and I go booth to booth and sort of comment. And I ended up with several, CISOs just walking around with me to see my interaction with the people at the booth. Okay. So there was one guy at a booth who, and I don't remember the specific interaction because there are hundreds of these every year that you see 100 companies in 6 hours, right?
Yeah.
So I don't remember, except on rare occasions, a specific interaction, and only when it was really hilarious, or when I saw a good friend from a long time ago. So maybe 8 years, 10 years after I had done this, a guy came over and encountered me in the marketplace and said, Oh, you're Fred Cohen. Oh, man. RSA, I was working for a company and I was trying for 6 months to explain to them how stupid this particular thing they were doing was. And they didn't listen to me. And you came over to the booth and you talked to the CEO and right in his face, you just told him the problem and you explained why. And he changed the company. And he said, I've always wanted to thank you. So, 8-10 years later, I have a good friend I didn't even know I had. And he wants to work with me. Yeah.
See,
those
and
relationships are the things that really work over time.
So I'm going to morph that into a quick conversation about brand, because what you've been doing for a long time, Fred, is creating a really consistent brand. And that's your story right there is an indication of just how powerful that is, because it really does stay over time. Once you get into people's psychology like that, you can be there forever, even though you don't have a lot of contact with them after that. I mean, that guy knew who you were 8 years later just because of your brand, who you are. You did something for him that made a huge difference in his life. And even though you weren't intending to at the time. But that's the power of having a narrative that extends across years, because people remember it and they come back to you, and you have these relationships that, provide a context in which people are more likely to do business with you.
So now, interesting you say that, because, there's a saying, and I don't know the exact saying, but I'll just say it wrong. It takes a lifetime to build a reputation and an instant to destroy it.
Yes, very much.
So wait, let's just be clear. So I could accidentally be really nice and pleasant and friendly to somebody, and that would destroy my lifetime of efforts to be direct and to the point. I got to be careful not to be too polite.
Yes, don't hire Fred if you're looking for nice.
No, come on, I'm a nice guy.
I know you're a nice guy. You are crunchy on the outside and soft and mushy on the inside.
Well, now that everybody's going to try and take advantage of me.
Okay.
So I'm watching Elizabeth Warren, and I'm sorry this conversation is running too long. We're watching Elizabeth Warren on some TV interview show a couple nights ago, and I'm sitting there with my wife, and I'm saying, she's just too intense for people to be able to handle, right? And she's incredibly smart.
Yeah.
And her use of words is she's really, really good at saying a lot in a few words.
Yeah, she's very articulate.
Yeah, extremely. I mean, just beyond the pale. And I'm looking at this and I'm saying, what would be the result of an interaction between her and Trump if they ever got on a debate stage?
I would love to see that.
And I'm imagining it because, Trump is incredibly successful, more than he was ever successful in the hotel business. He's really successful in the convincing a segment of the population that, he and only he is right.
Right.
And I'm trying to do this without any positive or negative affect about the individuals. What happens when he stands up on a stage and does what he always does, which is just say stuff, or we can use the term BS. He says stuff that is not true. He may or may not know that it's true or believe that it's true, but he says stuff that's not true, factually. And what happens if he gets his 30 seconds and he has 8 statements of fact that are not true, and the person on the other side says, well, there were 8 untrue statements you made there. This one's not true, and here's why. This one's not true, and here's why. This one's not true, and here's why. The other 4 you can read on my website. If you want, blah, 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 then vote for him. Otherwise, vote for me, right? And I can just imagine these 2 completely different influence approaches and the audiences they play to, really quite literally segmenting the United States. And then I said, imagine that she has a hat and they're selling hats and the hats say, "Make America Smart Again." Trump's "Make America Great Again." She's "Make America Smart." Which one would be better? Which one would you vote for? I'm unconvinced that the smart again wins, right? Because
so now you get into all sorts of different things. But yes, smart doesn't always win over stupid. That's absolutely
no, not over stupid. I think that's a misappropriation. No,
Okay.
great, right? He's saying it's about greatness,
Right.
and she's saying it's about smartness.
Smartness.
And why do you think being smart is better than being great? If you admire people that are successful, that make a lot of money, right? There's lots of people I know that have lots of money, and I use the expression, more money than brains.
Yeah.
Right? They do things which I look at as, oh my God, what? You paid $40 million to buy an estate with a beautiful house on it, and you tore down the house and spent another $40 million building a house, and you're going to visit it twice a year, if that, and sell it in 5 years, for half of what you paid for it.
Yes, I believe the old saying that relates to that is more money than sense.
Yeah, more dollars than cents.
More dollars than cents. Okay.
Okay. Think about it, right?
Yeah. Well, listen, we're running
normally every dollar is 100 cents, CENTS.
Yes.
So there's a nice pun in there.
We're running long and running way over time. So I'm going to bring this podcast to a conclusion and say goodbye, everybody, and have a good week from Fred Cohen and Adam Gordon. And if you have a cybersecurity company and you're looking to grow it, we're the guys to talk to.
All right. Do I get to say something?
You do.
Oh, I just wanted to say, if you bother to watch our website and review these videos, have a great holiday season if you don't listen to next week.
Please do. Absolutely. And goodbye and good night.